Conversations with Iris. Here's your host, my loving wife, Iris.
Hola, mi gente bonita. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to Conversations with Iris, where we sit in the stories that just shape us, bring you raw truth, real healing, and that soulful goodness we love to call heart. That corazón. Say it with me. Corazón. That sounds beautiful in Spanish already. I love bringing you guys these conversations, so let's keep raising that necessary awareness that we have to. Let's keep listening to each other because every story matters. Yours, mine, theirs, everything matters. And hey, don't forget to send me some fan mail. Come on, I feel like we're slacking on that area. Let me know how an episode touched you. Tell me the scoop, the real deal, and the behind the scenes tea. I'm Latina, so we're nosy like that. So we got to know everything. It just runs in our blood, if you know what I mean. And of course, don't forget to show some love to our brother podcasts out there, the Short Desk Podcast. They do their thing every Tuesday, streaming on all platforms. They paved the way for this podcast that could. They're all love and all family over there. So make sure you check them out. Now, I want to start our episode by asking you a question. And listen to this question. Are you a person who suffers from bipolar disorder? Do you know someone who has bipolar disorder? Or were you recently diagnosed? Or know someone who was just recently diagnosed? I feel like this wonderful conversation today is going to stretch your mind and your spirit in ways you may not even know that you're going to be expecting that it will. Let me tell you guys about our wonderful guest today. He is the author of Bipolar Awakenings, The Quest to Heal Bipolar Disorder. And for over a decade, he has been challenging everything we think we know about bipolar disorder, the trauma behind it, the spiritual emerge effect of it. Society calls bipolar disorder, hear this very well, a lifelong incurable illness. You heard that. But no, wait a minute. He dares to step in, challenges society to ask the different question. What if these extreme states are not breakdowns, but spiritual breakthroughs trying to happen? I'm going to repeat that. What if these extreme states are not breakdown, but spiritual breakthroughs trying to happen? He teaches about Kundalini, I hope I said that right, energy, bioenergetic blockages, breathwork healing, and the profound ways trauma lives inside the body through. With the help of his retreats, which have helped so many people all around the world, which is amazing, to help them release that trauma, help them reorganize their inner life, and even help them transition away from medication, all safely under medical guidance. So today, we're going to dive deep into your consciousness. Without further ado, bienvenidos to Conversations with Iris. Sean Blackwell, it's truly a pleasure to have you here, sir.
Hello, Iris. Very nice to be here to see you
Oh,
in
yes.
Spanish and in English. Tudo
I
bem?
love it.
Eu falo pouco português também.
Oh, I love it. I like I mentioned to you, I have a lot of love for my Brazilian Latino Americans as well. I love the culture. I love everything. So I know that you're tuning in from Brazil, which is that beautiful country on my to-do list to visit as well.
Yes, I'm the lone gringo in Guarujá, Brazil, just outside of Santos.
Oh, and he's an hour away from São Paulo people, so just to let you guys know.
Yeah.
So, Sean, before we get into the science, the spiritual effect of this, and all the deep stuff, I mean, you spend years studying extreme states of psychosis and mania from a spiritual lens, okay? You've done that from far away. But
hmm
I have to ask you, what was that first moment that sparked your heart and made you look at bipolar differently? And you said, wait a minute, this isn't what the psychiatric world think it is. When was that spark and when did it happen?
hmm bit of a long story because it crosses ten years actually. But in 1996, I was in an intensive self-help seminar called the Landmark Forum. I don't know if you've heard of it. Have you heard the Landmark Forum? You know what that
No, I
is?
have not.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a 3-day or a 5-day course, very intense. They keep you in a room with 150 people for like 12 hours a day for 5 days. And
Wow.
on the second day of the course, they asked us to do a fear meditation. And I didn't think I felt much fear. I was 30 years old. I thought I was a pretty brave guy. And in the middle of that fear meditation, I saw the depth gauges from my scuba diving equipment from when I had had an accident 2 months earlier. And
Wow.
and as soon as those depth gauges came into my vision, I felt a big punch at my heart, a big explosion of energy at my heart chakra, and all the fear of that moment came over me, and I was just crying and shaking. And by the time I was done, all my senses had sharpened. Like I could see detail in curtains I couldn't see before. Sense of smell was sharper. I also had a feeling of all knowingness, like, oh, I feel like I finally know what I've always been missing, this sort of feeling. And then it all blended into a feeling of oneness. I went home. I started to open up to my parents about family issues and things like that. And I was really kind of out there and vulnerable. But then after 5 days, I was on the course the final day, and it hit me that, oh, I know what happened.
Mm.
This is what it feels like when you're dead, because I felt so perfect. I felt just so everything's great, you know? And
Yeah.
then I was like, oh, I've died. I died in the scuba diving accident. And once that clicked, that I had died in the scuba diving accident, then it was just like all my rational thought passed. I thought I was in like a kind of a purgatory where everybody was kind of assisting me to move to heaven or another dimension. And I went in, the course was happening in a hotel ballroom. I went into an adjacent ballroom to basically meet God. And I didn't know how that would happen, but I took off all my clothes down to my underwear. I had to let go of everything, so I peed on the floor and the carpet of this ballroom. And eventually, the police came, and I refused to comply with them and put my clothes back on because I thought I was being tested by God. And so
Yeah.
they grabbed me and they handcuffed me, put me in a stretcher, took me to psychiatric emergency, where I quickly learned, how rough it can be. I was given a forced injection after a few hours because I wouldn't shut up.
Oh my God.
And then I did fall asleep. My family was with me there, thank goodness. And when I woke up, I was still in the hospital. I thought we were sort of in a giant spaceship going to another dimension, like heaven or something. And that didn't happen. And when I woke up, I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew I needed to get out of there. And so I told them what they needed to hear, that my name's Sean, this is my family, and I think I had some sort of PTSD reaction to the to being on the course and the scuba diving trauma coming up.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky. They let me go within 4 days. And when I went home, then I just stayed very quiet and spent the next few months, just sort of integrating, you might say, just getting comfortable
Mhm.
again. I was still vulnerable, but I knew something good had happened to me, that I had had some kind of a breakthrough that had overcome years of on again, off again depression. And when I went back to work, I worked in advertising at the time. I was between jobs. And when I got the new job, my career, which had been a real struggle, that's why I was on the self-help course, because I was so exasperated by my career. When I went back to work over the next 3 years, my salary tripled,
Oh
so
wow.
just
That's
everything
a
got a lot
blessing.
better. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
a blessing. Yeah.
yeah. And so that was my first entrance into this. But at the time, I had learned about the work of a guy named Dr. Stanislav Grof a year later, and he had this book called The Stormy Search for the Self. And in that book, he said there's this thing that can happen to people that's a spiritual experience that can look like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, like the acute psychosis that gets labeled bipolar or schizophrenia, depending on the content.
Yeah.
And I had all of his criteria for this, what he called a spiritual emergency. It's like a spiritual experience that you have difficulty integrating. And so it starts to look like psychosis. And so back then I was like, okay, so I had a spiritual emergency, just like I thought. It's a 1 in 20,000 experience, something like that. I thought it was completely different from a mental health issue, and that the psychiatrist had just made a big mistake when they said that I might have bipolar or schizophrenia. I didn't even know what those things were, but that was I was just like, well, I don't need to see them again because they don't understand what happened to me, you know?
Mm. And Sean,
Yeah.
I just wanted to emphasize on something that you said. You had
Uh-huh.
a spiritual emergency, but
Uh-huh.
through the lens of society, society would automatically label that a mental breakdown.
Yeah.
That's what they would say, right?
Sure, 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 sure.
You
Well, you heard the
exactly.
details,
Yeah.
I was naked in public, I was peeing in the carpet in a hotel. It's it was from the psychiatric lens, acute psychosis for sure, no doubt about it. And I share that story because I just don't want to tell people, well, I had this spiritual experience that got put in the psychiatric hospital, and then people think, oh, that poor guy, like, why would they have done that to him? They have to know. People need to know the details to understand that this spiritual experience was really a motherfucker. Like
Mhm.
it really went there.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely sounds like that. And I think this is a great thing that you mentioned. Like I mentioned, society labels it as a mental breakdown, but it was not.
Mhm.
And it's powerful when someone steps outside that box and decides to question the narrative like you did. I mean, you basically opened up the door for healing in a completely different way, which we didn't even think about. I mean, you fundamentally just rejected the idea that bipolar disorder is uncurable, lifelong, but why do you think, you come to believe the mainstream model is missing the truth here? Like, do you think the system's fears what we don't understand?
Well, I just went back to my life, and got a little bit more aggressive about really what I wanted to do. And part of that meant leaving advertising and moving to Brazil. I met my wife; she was in Peru, and we moved to
Yeah.
Brazil. And I became an English teacher, which was a much better fit for me. But then in 2007, so a decade later, her, her younger niece Anna had some sort of a crisis. And when the family called us, I heard the symptoms and I was like, well, that sounds like what happened to me. They're calling it bipolar, but I don't know what they're talking about. And we went up to work with her and support her. And she was already heavily medicated when we got there, but she recovered quite quickly with our support, And I told the family, look, this could be a breakthrough for her. It doesn't necessarily need to be bipolar. But the psychiatrist insisted on keeping her on the meds. And so then I started to do some research into it and I learned a few things. First,
Mhm.
for mental illnesses like bipolar and schizophrenia, the psychiatrists only have symptoms to go on. They don't have any biological markers. There's no test to show that you've got a disorder. So this idea of it being biological is not really true. That's it's not a proven fact, we'll put it that way. And then the other thing is that there were pioneering psychiatrists in the 60s and 70s that recognized psychosis as an intended reorganization of the psyche, which is what happened to me. And so after doing this bulk of research, I realized that this 1 in 20,000 experience that I thought that I had was actually more like 1 in 20. And
Mm.
that was a shocker. That was like, oh my God, this is happening to all these people who are being labeled with bipolar to some degree. Um, and as we were preparing to go to the family to say, look, take Anna off the meds and we'll support her through the psychosis and see how we do. It's early in the game. We can see if we can make a difference. Her sister came back from Europe and went into crisis. Eliana, she went into
Oh,
crisis. So
oh, no.
two sisters going into acute psychosis 4 months apart without any previous psychiatric history. Um, But Eliana, the older sister, knowing what happened to Anna, she came to us first and we worked her through her first episode. After 5 days, we returned her to her family. We didn't even tell the family we had her. And then she had a second episode, and then a third, we worked her through again. And after that, she was able to return to university without medications, finished with honors, went on to get a great job, and then eventually did her master's degree. And then 7 years later, episodes started happening, but we got her those 7 years free of medication, you know. And that's
Wow.
what really got me into this work. That wow, this is really different.
And thank you for sharing that story. And how is your niece is doing now? You mean
Well,
they graduated with honors and all, but how they're doing
yeah.
now?
Well, you know what? They're living their lives and they're doing fine, but now they're both medicated still. They are. Um, and with the work that I've done with people on my private retreats, for example, I've never really had the opportunity to work with them in that way. It requires a pretty brave opening up. You've really got to be ready to go into your pain. And they haven't shown much interest. I do 10-day retreats with people, and I've never done them with either of my nieces. You know,
Mm,
but
mm.
with Eliana, she has thanked me for the 7 years that she got, because without the work that we did with her, she would have been medicated right through university.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And just going to fast forward here a little bit, you
Sure.
mentioned your retreat. And
Right.
in 2013, you created this private Bipolar Awakenings retreat.
Right.
Can you tell me about the inspiration behind that, which I can see where we're coming from, but what happens during the bipolar breath work? Like you talk about like bioenergetic blockages, all that stuff. I want our listeners to really understand, how this
Uh-huh.
retreat could help individuals.
Sure. Well, a big part of my studies started with this guy who created the term spiritual emergency, Dr. Stanislav Grof. He's a Czech psychiatrist. He moved to the United States in the 60s, lived in California back then. And along with recognizing that a psychosis is an intended reorganization of the psyche, he saw that the roots of it, and this wasn't just him, there were other psychiatrists involved too. The roots are rooted in trauma, and that trauma is something, it's not necessarily something bad that happens to you. It's an event that happens to you that is so painful that you do not allow yourself to feel part of what's going on. And that's the trauma part. So if you've ever seen somebody at a funeral who doesn't cry when a loved one has passed away that's very close to them, chances
Mm-hmm.
are they're traumatized. All right. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's what's going on. And this trauma gets stored in what can best be described as a bioenergetic system. In the East, they might call it the chakra system or a Kundalini system. And those blockages, if you get enough of that material in your bioenergetic system locked up, then you can go into crisis. And it is closely related to the central nervous system. So there is this close parallel. But at this point, we don't have any scientific proof of this bioenergetic system. But
Interesting.
it seems to be a very effective analogy because we work in a sort of trauma release orientation, put it that way.
Hmm. Interesting. So going back to Kundalini, I hope I said that correctly. How does
Kundalini. Yeah,
Kundalini? Thank you. How does it relate to the mania and psychosis aspect of it? I just want to get
right.
a little bit more of a understanding on that.
Right. Well, it's like the Kundalini is our life force and it's flowing through our body all the time. But when it comes up against these, this is what I think is going on, anyways. And this is the general thinking in transpersonal psychology, the area of psychology that Groff was in, is that if you've got these blockages, the Kundalini doesn't flow through properly. And if that gets blocked enough, then you can go into psychosis. So it's the inability of the Kundalini to function properly, which is causing these non ordinary state experiences. Okay.
Mm, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, in your words, what would make biopolar breath work different from regular breath work or meditation, just differently in that
Yeah.
parallel?
That's really complicated. Um, that's a super complicated question because when people think of meditation, usually they think of some sort of technique for relaxation. That's the main
Right.
thing. And there are breathwork techniques that have a intention of relaxation. All right. Other breathwork techniques, like the Wim Hof breathing, are focused on reducing your inflammation, which is a whole other thing. You know, this is a style of breathing that can allow you to be outside in cold temperatures quite comfortably. All right, but with my work, it's founded in Stan Grof's holotropic breathwork, and that's a format that's designed to release trauma, where there's actually no specific breathing pattern or breathing technique you need. But in a safe setting where you're on a yoga mat and you're in your sweatpants and you've got a trained facilitator, you're going to overbreathe or do exaggerating breathing
Yeah.
to help your ego relax a little bit. And then when that happens, It's a little bit like a surfer going out to meet the waves. The breathing is like the swimming. You've got to swim out there to meet the waves first. But once the wave of the unconscious comes up, then you got to surf that wave, and the breathing isn't really that important. So often, for example, after 5 to 20 minutes of breathing, then the person gets in contact with this unconscious material, and they're really encouraged to physically express themselves through physical movement. And powerful music is playing with this as well. But there's this
Mhm.
physical movement and vocalization. Like powerful vocalization could be screaming, yelling, talking, barking, whatever you want to do. You're supposed to just follow your intuition, and that's how stuff gets released. Now, it's a formatted technique, holotropic breath work, usually in a group and with a limited time frame of 3 hours. And that way it's contraindicated for people with deeper disorders. But then I was like, well, what happens if we give people an almost unlimited time frame, like 10 straight days, undivided attention, and see what happens? And so in 2013, I went off to my first client in Romania who had translated all my work on YouTube into Romanian.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah, and we started a 3-week retreat. And the reason for keeping the making it 3 weeks instead of two is I want, in case she went into psychosis, I wanted to have a full week where I had time to just get her back before I needed to put her in the psychiatric hospital because I didn't really know what was going to happen, right?
Mhm.
But eventually, it settled into a 10-day retreat and became quite a predictable pattern for the most part.
Wow. Wow, that is pretty amazing and translated in Romanian?
All my videos were translated in Romanian. I wasn't speaking Romanian when I was there.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's good to know. And I definitely want to move forward and shift and talk about the surrogate breath work and the safe healing because
Okay.
you develop something called the surrogate breath work, where
Mhm.
you take one or on a client's trauma or traumatic experience, that energy, and process it through their own body. So one of the questions I have, how does that channeling work? Like channeling someone else's pain to help them heal. I think that's so powerful and amazing as well.
Yeah, well, like I take it with the surrogate breath work, I'm taking people's pain through my body. But here's the thing, is it's not a conscious effort. It's simply being there in the room with the client. And if this intelligence that's actually behind the healing work wants me to do some healing work on behalf of the client, the energy will come my way. And so this was a big departure from Stan Grof's work. He had said that we all have an inner healer and we need to follow the inner healer, which comes through as our intuition, to work through our own material. And this was very important in the Grof work. But I was getting knocked out on my retreats after 5 or 6 days. I just felt like I was covered in charcoal. And eventually, with the help of one of my clients who became a supporter, we figured out together that it was better for any supporter or myself who's feeling like they're taking on any energy to do breath work as well on the retreats. And then that helped strengthen the process because the client could only do so much themselves. And then some would get transferred to us. And then we would do the breathing. And that way we could really make the most of our retreat hours together.
Oh, wow. That is very good. And like going back to that with the breath work, the safe
Uh-huh.
healing, you also mentioned how medication. I want to talk about that
All right.
because are a lot of these clients still under their meds, let's say when they go to the retreat, or how does that process work? I'm assuming that they're taking their meds still when they get to the retreat, but eventually, safely on a safe measure system, they stop taking the medications eventually. So how does that work there?
Yeah, and I should emphasize too, usually when people think of a retreat, they think of many people. This is a private retreat just for one client who provides a safe space and their supporter, a voluntary supporter. That way we can keep the price a little bit down a little bit. But oh my goodness. I just went blank. What was your question
It's
again?
okay. Okay, so when a client comes, it's okay because there's a lot of great information on here. So what happens? It
Uh,
happens to me too. Okay, so when a client comes to your private retreat, and thank you for emphasizing that when they come, it's a private retreat.
Yeah.
Evidently, they're still taking their meds,
Oh,
right?
right.
They're
They're
still
taking their
taking.
meds. Yeah.
So, how do we
Thanks.
go from taking all these meds to transition them to safely stop taking these meds in a safe measure? So, how do
Right.
we do that?
Yeah. And this has been probably the most challenging question of my work. This has been the most difficult question. And in the beginning, because I was also angry at psychiatry myself for what happened to me and what I was studying from the peer support movement, I had kind of an anti psychiatry, anti medication attitude. This would be like in 2007. But life kind of showed me over the years that some people need these medications to function. If you've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, it's really hard not to function if you're
Yeah.
not on the meds. And so eventually, and a few clients did miss retreats because of not taking meds. And so eventually I got to a place where I realized that the clients should just stay on their medication and the psychiatry can take care of the biological side and I can work on this, chakra spiritual dimension. And then if we make enough progress, then what should happen, and this is a recent sort of insight, what should happen is that the psychiatric medications should make the client feel regularly draggy, kind of a low energy place.
Right.
And to me, if they feel like they've had a bit of a breakthrough, if they're feeling over medicated like that from being draggy all the time, then that's a good excuse to go back to your psychiatrist and say, look, I'm feeling really heavy. Do you think we could reduce the meds about 25%? Something like that. And if you come to a psychiatrist that way, you're much more likely to get them to work with you. If you come back and say, oh, I'm feeling amazing, I want to go off all my meds, they'll be very guarded. But
Yeah.
yeah. And with that said, I mean, my second client, Monica Kettler, um, she went off her medications within 2 months of her first retreat, and that was in 2014. And she's
Wow.
been off her medications ever since.
Mm.
And she also is a therapist now, and she does the same kind of work that I'm doing, but in Germany.
Oh my goodness, that is
Yeah,
amazing. And I
yeah.
don't think, and this is just me because with my medical background and degree, I feel like people don't understand that a lot of times, a lot of these, I'm going to say bipolar medicines or mental medications that we have out there, not to
Mhm.
exclude any type of disorders or anything, they have so many bad long-term side effects for your health too. People don't even
Sure.
realize that. The long-term side effects of it are not going to show right there, but later on. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it. People just taking regular meds for Xanax, like for anxiety attacks. You know what I mean? So
Mhm,
I'm very
mhm,
impressed and glad that you're doing that. And I'm glad that she's teaching your ways to other people in Germany as well. That's amazing. That's so
mhm,
amazing,
mhm.
Sean.
Yeah,
So
it's nice, it's nice, and actually her work this happened in September, is
wow.
we had a very prominent psychiatrist in the Netherlands recommend another client of mine, second client, Tim Canote, do a retreat, and Tim knew he didn't have the experience because Tim had talked to this doctor about, my work, and so the doctor was like, "How about you run this retreat?" And he said he didn't have the experience, and so he brought Moni in, and so we had two of my former clients doing a private retreat, which was endorsed by the director of a psychiatric department with a actual famous athlete in the Netherlands that can't be disclosed.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a big
Mm.
deal. That was a big deal. It was like,
Look at
okay,
you.
I'm
I
making,
love that.
yeah, I'm making some progress in Europe.
Yeah, yeah, I love this. And Sean, as we transition here to a closure, I mean, evidently your work is bold, unconventional, and just, I love how, I don't know, I get the sense of being hopeful. I love this. But before we close, I want to ask you something for our listeners.
Mhm.
Imagine someone listening to this right now who's been newly diagnosed. They feel scared, they're broken. What message would you want to leave with them?
Well, and this is a good transition. My book and my website are both called Bipolar Awakenings. When people see my videos online, they might call me for a consultation and say, so what do I have? Do I have a spiritual experience? And that to them means they don't need medications? Or do I have a mental illness where I do need medications? It's an either
Yeah.
or. And that's how I initially came into this work. But I tell them, I say, you're having a bipolar awakening. And that means it's got potential for both. But the thing is, if you don't do the inner work, usually the medications are going to be a way of life. There are some people that go off the meds and they do okay, and a significant number of people, if they go off their meds within the first 3 months, they're going to
Yeah.
be okay. But for people, for example, if you've been hospitalized more than twice, chances are you're going to be medicated for life, you know, unless you do this deep work. And then you're going to have to face some pain. And that's something that most people don't want to do. But if you're courageous out there, there are ways to move forward, there are ways to heal. Take some time. It's not an overnight thing. The people who've gone off medications have needed 2 retreats with me to get it done. Moni needed his second retreat. Tim needed a second retreat. So,
Wow.
you know, but I'm also doing distance work these days, and we don't have time to get into that. But the information's on my website. This thing about the surrogate breath work, I've also learned that I can do that at a distance for people as well. And that was a big shocker. We don't really have a lot of time to get into that, but I'm able to pick up information from the clients at a distance because the actual healing field is happening sort of in a quantum dimension. There's no
Mhm.
time and there's no space. It's a little bit like the internet. You're halfway around the
Yeah.
world from me and we're having this simultaneous conversation with no lag. It's that quantum dimension where the healing takes place. So,
And thank you for all of that. Thank you for sharing for someone that's hearing this that may need to hear this because they were recently diagnosed or it's currently suffering from this. Thank you for letting us know that you could do this, over a Zoom call, we hope, virtually. Especially, the breathing, exercises and so forth. So, Sean, I want to thank you again for sharing your heart with us. I mean, your wisdom and this transformative perspective on bipolar disorder. We need to hear more of this. So I definitely want to take the opportunity and thank you so much for this.
oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Iris. You've been a great listener.
Aw. But before we go, can you let our listeners know where can they find you, join your retreats, and also read your wonderful book, Bipolar Awakenings?
Yeah. And both of my books, my first book this is my second book. My first book is called Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? Both books are available on Amazon and as free PDFs on my website, which is bipolarawakenings.com. And, you're going to find within 5 to 10 years, maybe I think having bipolar disorder is going to turn from being a mental illness to something to brag about, to be quite
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
Because these are the healers of the future. I see people with bipolar disorder as the healers of the future. So,
Mhm. I
yeah.
agree.
So
I
Bipolar
agree.
Awakenings, that's where it's at. You'll find me there.
Oh, thank you so much again, Sean. And thank you, mi gente bonita, for tuning in, for showing up and being part of this beautiful community and talking about something so personal, but that we really need to be talking about bipolar disorder. We need to be talking more about it. So, Sean, thank you for giving us more of an insight and enlightenment on this issue. It is a spiritual awakening. Remember, new episodes drop every Friday on all platforms. So make sure you subscribe, caught up, and show your girl some love. Con mucho amor, this has been Conversations with Iris. Until next time, my beautiful people, stay grounded, stay open, and stay in truth. Thank you all. Adios.